Look at her, Thorne. She's wearing the dress I bought her 5 years ago. It's pathetic. She thinks she's in a movie. Let her play pretend, Michael. It makes the kill easier. She's a waitress playing chess against a grandmaster. They called her delusional. They said she was walking into a slaughter. In the high-stakes world of New York divorce court, you never represent yourself against a monster like Michael Luiz, the CEO who built a $200 million empire on lies. Everyone expected Desiree Moore to cry, sign the papers and vanish, but Michael Luiz forgot one thing. The person who meticulously cleans the floors knows exactly where the dirt is buried. What unfolded over the next 3 days didn't just silence his laughter, it detonated his entire criminal life. This is the story of the wife who played the fool only to checkmate the king. The laughter wasn't subtle. It was a rich, throaty sound that bounced off the polished mahogany walls of the Superior Court of New York, Department 42, echoing the absolute arrogance of the man who produced it. It was the sound of Michael Luiz, the 48-year-old CEO of Luiz Global Logistics, a man who had never lost a negotiation, a lawsuit, or a game of solitaire in his life. Michael leaned back in his Italian leather chair at the defense table, the expensive charcoal suit doing nothing to hide the contemptuous smirk twisting his lips. He ran a hand over the immaculate lapel, its fabric alone costing more than Desiree's monthly rent payment. He turned to his attorney, Marcus Thorne, and whispered loud enough for the reporters huddled in the back and the bailiff standing nearby to clearly hear. "Look at her, Thorne. She's wearing that goddamn sapphire dress. The one from the Guggenheim Gala 5 years ago. It's a tragic costume choice for her farewell performance." Marcus Thorne, a man known in legal circles as the Butcher of Midtown, was a study in cold, predatory control. His silver hair was slicked back. His eyes, the color of chipped flint, were currently fixated on Desiree, sitting across the aisle. He didn't laugh, a noise he considered inefficient. He merely offered a fractional smirk, tapping a gold Mont Blanc fountain pen against the heavy oak table. "Let her play dress-up, Michael." Thorne's voice was a low, dry rasp. "It minimizes the resistance. Judge Stone despises incompetence. She'll hold your wife in contempt before we break for lunch. It's an easy kill." Desiree Moore, the petitioner, sat alone at the plaintiff's table. She looked small, almost swallowed by the huge wooden furniture. The courtroom air conditioning was blasting, and she shivered slightly, pulling her thin arms tighter around her chest.
Her table was starkly empty. Unlike the defense, which was cluttered with paralegals, sleek laptops, and stacks of bound evidence labeled with colorful tabs, Desiree had only a single yellow legal pad, a cheap plastic cup of lukewarm water, and a worn velvet purse. Her brown hair was pulled back in a severe, sensible bun that did nothing to soften her features. To the casual observer, and every single person present in the gallery, she looked exactly like a defeated woman. A housewife, quietly traded in for a newer, flashier model. Michael's 24-year-old personal assistant, Tessa Vance, who was currently not in court but was likely shopping, using Michael's supplementary credit card. Desiree knew she looked exactly how Michael wanted her to look, weak, negligible, and utterly out of her depth. She kept her gaze fixed on the mahogany surface, counting the faint scratches in the wood. Michael had offered her a settlement of $50,000.
$50,000 for 10 years of marriage, 10 years of her life, and 10 years of supporting the man who had built his empire on the back of their partnership. She had refused. Not out of greed, but because $50,000 wouldn't even cover the interest on Michael's hidden assets. "All rise!" the bailiff, a stocky man named Sergeant Davies, bellowed, his voice vibrating with authority. The heavy door behind the bench swung open, and the Honorable Judge Eleanor Stone swept into the room. Judge Stone was known as a jurist of the old guard, efficient, mercilessly intelligent, and possessing zero patience for sentimentality or incompetence. She adjusted her reading glasses and looked down at the docket, her expression already weary. Case number 77C194. Moore versus Luiz. Judge Stone grumbled, pulling the microphone closer. We are here for the final hearing on asset division and spousal support. Appearances, please. Marcus Thorne stood up, executing the movement with the smooth, practiced grace of a seasoned predator. He buttoned his jacket with one swift motion. Marcus Thorne, representing the respondent, Mr. Michael Luiz, Your Honor. The judge turned her gaze to the petitioner's table. Desiree stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the polished floor, a harsh, grating noise in the sudden quiet of the courtroom. Michael chuckled again, covering his mouth with a well-manicured hand, exchanging a knowing glance with Thorne. "Desiree Moore, Your Honor," she said. Her voice was soft, trembling slightly, barely clearing the table. "Representing myself." Judge Stone peered over her spectacles, her eyes drilling into Desiree. She sighed, a long, weary exhale that signaled she was already dreading the sheer waste of time this self-represented woman was about to inflict upon her schedule. "Mrs. Moore," the judge said, her voice slow and heavy with professional warning. "I am going to ask you this once, and I insist you listen carefully. Your husband is the chief executive officer of Luiz Global Logistics, a company valued in the hundreds of millions. The marital assets in question are estimated in the tens of millions. Mr. Thorne here has been practicing corporate and family law for 30 years. Are you absolutely, unequivocally certain you wish to proceed? You, madam, are bringing a sewing needle to a nuclear war." Desiree looked down at her hands, which were now gripping the edge of the table. The public humiliation was working exactly as Michael had intended. I cannot afford an attorney, Your Honor," Desiree whispered. "Mr. Luiz cut off my access to the joint account 6 months ago, shortly after he filed for divorce. I have no liquid capital." Marcus Thorne shot to his feet, quick as a striking viper. "Objection, Your Honor. The assertion of being denied funds is misleading, Mr.
Luiz merely secured the liquid assets to prevent frivolous, retaliatory spending. We offered Mrs. Moore a highly generous and fair settlement of $50,000 to cover her transition and living expenses. She refused it out of pure spite and malice." "50,000, the judge repeated, raising an elegant eyebrow in Thorne's direction. "For an estate of this unprecedented size, it is more than adequate, Your Honor," Thorne continued smoothly, his voice dripping with condescension. "Mrs. Moore was merely a waitress at a diner when they met. She has no financial literacy, no relevant work history, and zero capacity to manage complex capital. We are simply trying to protect the corporate estate from unwarranted financial disruption." "I see," Judge Stone said, her gaze returning to Desiree, sharp and critical. "Mrs. Moore, I am going to state this for the record. I strongly advise you to reconsider the settlement.
If you proceed with this self-representation, you will be held to the exact same standards as Mr. Thorne. I will not tolerate inefficiency. If you fail to object, critical evidence gets admitted. If you fail to file the correct motions, you lose. Do you understand the professional gravity of this undertaking?" Desiree finally looked up. For a split second, a microsecond that only the judge's trained eye might have caught, the fear in her deep brown eyes seemed to vanish. It was replaced by something entirely different, a core of cold, determined steel, something harder and sharper than Michael's chipped flint lawyer. But it was gone so fast that Michael, still basking in his own smugness, missed it completely. "I understand, Your Honor," Desiree said, her voice still soft, but now carrying a faint new resonance. "I'm ready to proceed." Michael leaned over to Thorne, a wide, victorious grin returning to his face. "Watch this, Marcus. She's going to break down and cry in 10 minutes flat. I bet 50 grand she can't get through her opening." Mr. Thorne, your opening statement, the judge ordered, her tone brusque, eager to get the inevitable slaughter over with. Marcus Thorne rose and walked to the center of the room, taking the stage as a performer. He didn't use notes. He never did. He carried the confidence of a man who rarely had to argue fact, only narrative. Your Honor, Thorne began, his baritone voice warm, trustworthy, and persuasive. This case is tragic, yes, but it is fundamentally simple. Michael Luiz is a visionary. He built Luiz Global Logistics from a garage startup, a one-man operation, into a global logistics empire that today employs thousands of dedicated American workers. He worked 18-hour days. He missed holidays. He sacrificed everything, including his own personal life and peace, for the success of this family's future. Thorne paused, pivoting to gesture accusingly toward Desiree, his face shifting into a mask of righteous indignation. And what did his wife do? She stayed home. She attended charity luncheons. She spent his hard-earned money. And now, simply because the marriage has, unfortunately, broken down due to irreconcilable differences, she demands half. She demands to dismantle a thriving corporate entity that secures thousands of jobs merely to fund a lavish lifestyle she did nothing to earn, nothing to build. He paced back toward the defense table, his closing statements resonating powerfully. We will prove that a prenuptial agreement, which she conveniently claims to have lost, exists. We will prove that her contributions to this marriage were negligible at best. We ask this court to limit spousal support to the statutory minimum, granting Mr. Luiz full, unequivocal retention of the company shares and all corporate assets. He deserves to keep what he built. Thorne sat down. It was a strong, standard opening that painted Michael as the self-made, hard-working hero and Desiree as the parasitic leech, a familiar and often successful narrative in high-net-worth divorce cases. Mrs. Moore, the judge said, her voice impatient. Your opening statement. Keep it concise, and please, approach the podium. Desiree, however, didn't move toward the podium. She walked awkwardly around her small table and stood directly in the middle of the aisle. She held her single yellow legal pad against her chest like a shield, or perhaps a holy book. My husband, Michael, she started, her voice still shaking, a clear sign of nerves. He says I did nothing. He says I was just a waitress. And that is true. She paused, the confession hanging in the air. I was a waitress at the Blue Diner on 4th Street when we met. Michael rolled his eyes dramatically, leaning forward to whisper to Thorne. Here comes the sob story. Wait for the waterworks. But Desiree didn't cry. She took a deep breath, visibly steadying herself. The tremor in her voice did not disappear, but the underlying tone changed. It became focused. The law in this state speaks of a partnership, Your Honor. It speaks of good faith, full disclosure, and equitable division, Desiree continued, projecting her voice just enough to be heard clearly over the hum of the air conditioning. Michael is asking you to believe that he built Luiz Global Logistics alone. But more importantly, he is asking you to believe that the $50 million in the Vanguard Trust doesn't exist. The courtroom went absolutely silent. The clatter of the court reporter's keys abruptly stopped. Marcus Thorne's silver head snapped up, his casual posture instantly replaced by rigid alertness. Michael Luiz, who had been chuckling only seconds earlier, froze mid-smirk. His confident facade cracked, replaced by a look of pure, paralyzing confusion. The what trust? Judge Stone asked, leaning forward, her earlier boredom replaced by a sudden, intense curiosity. The Vanguard Capital Asset Trust, Your Honor, Desiree repeated, her voice remarkably stabilized now, gaining strength with every word. And the Shell Corporation in the Cayman Islands, registered as Blue Ocean Holdings, and the 3 commercial properties in Seattle, Washington, purchased under the name of his driver, Thomas Miller. Michael's face went from smug, victorious pink to a deep, alarming shade of purple in the span of 3 seconds. He slammed his hand onto the oak table so hard the heavy glass of water jumped. "That's a lie! She's lying! She doesn't know what she's talking about!" Michael roared, losing all semblance of his CEO composure. "Mr. Luiz, sit down!" Judge Stone barked, her gavel slamming down once decisively. She turned her gaze, now devoid of pity and filled only with sharp, professional interest, to Desiree. "Mrs. Moore, those are grave allegations. Alleging the willful concealment of tens of millions of dollars in assets, especially without irrefutable proof, is a quick way to have your case dismissed, and you will be held liable for the respondent's exorbitant legal fees. Do you understand the risk you are running?" "I know, Your Honor," Desiree said simply. She walked back to her table, deliberately picking up a single, crisp document from her pad. "I may not have a law degree, but I do have the certified wire transfer records and the specific invoices tied to the Vanguard Trust." She handed the paper to the bailiff. "Marked as Exhibit A, Your Honor, a certified bank record." Marcus Thorne snatched the copy from the bailiff's hand. His eyes quickly scanned the page. It was a wire transfer record, a clean, undeniable transfer of exactly $4.
$1 million from a Luiz Global Logistics operational account to a generic numbered account linked to the Cayman Islands, the very account she had just named. Thorne's eyes narrowed into slits. He looked at Michael Luiz with pure, concentrated venom. "You told me the corporate accounts were clean," he hissed, his voice dangerously low. "They are," Michael whispered back frantically, sweat beading instantly on his forehead and tracking paths through his expensive bronzer. "That account is encrypted. There's no way she could have gotten that. She doesn't even know how to use Excel, Marcus. She knits." Desiree returned to her seat. She looked directly at Michael Luiz, and for the first time in the entire proceeding, she smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the precise, chillingly cold smile of a patient hunter who had just watched the heavy steel jaws of her meticulously set trap clamp shut. "Mr.
"Thorne, call your first witness," Judge Stone said, her voice dropping an octave, the temperature in the room plummeting further. "And I highly suggest that this witness be fully prepared to answer questions under oath." The air in the courtroom had shifted completely. It was no longer a predicted slaughter. It was a full-on, desperate brawl, and the despised underdog had just drawn first blood. Marcus Thorne was a seasoned veteran. 30 years in the game meant he knew how to contain an explosion, even if he couldn't prevent the initial blast. He shoved Exhibit A deep into his briefcase, dismissing it internally as a potential forgery or a misunderstanding to be swiftly dealt with later, away from the judge's glare. He couldn't afford to look panicked. "I call Mr. Anthony Rossi to the stand," Thorne announced, his voice regaining its professional composure, though the underlying tension was palpable. Anthony Rossi, Michael's chief financial officer, CFO, approached the stand. He was a man with a nervous tic, a perpetually tight collar, and a custom-tailored suit that surely cost more than Desiree's first 3 cars combined. He took the oath with a shaky but determined hand. "Mr. Rossi," Thorne began, pacing slowly, drawing the attention away from the defense table. "You manage the high-level operational finances for Luiz Global Logistics, correct?" "I do, sir," Rossi confirmed, his voice smooth and practiced. "Are you familiar with the petitioner's baseless claims regarding hidden assets, specifically a Vanguard Trust or a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands?" "I have never, in my 10 years of service, heard of such things," Rossi lied smoothly, looking directly at the judge. "Our books are meticulously audited annually by 3 separate international firms. Everything at Luiz Global is strictly above board, transparent, and legally compliant. Mrs. Moore is regrettably confusing standard corporate operating expenses. Perhaps a large invoice for a new server farm, for example, with whatever fantasy she has tragically cooked up in her isolation. "Thank you, Mr. Rossi," Thorne said, looking pointedly at Judge Stone. "You see, Your Honor, a simple, if regrettable, misunderstanding of highly complex corporate finance. The defense rests its preliminary witness on this matter. Mrs. Moore, your witness." Thorne turned to Desiree, offering a tight, condescending smile that didn't reach his flint-like eyes. He expected her to fumble, to ask an irrelevant question, or to simply wave the witness away in defeat. Desiree stood up. This time, she left her yellow legal pad on the table. She walked right up to the witness stand, stopping just short of the railing. She looked Anthony Rossi directly in the eye. Rossi shifted nervously in the witness chair. He had known Desiree for nearly a decade. She used to invite him and his family over for Christmas dinner. He remembered the smell of her phenomenal lasagna. He did not know she could read a balance sheet, let alone dismantle one. "Hello, Anthony," Desiree said. Her voice was steady, friendly even, completely disarming. "Mrs. Moore?" He nodded stiffly, trying to maintain his professional facade. "Anthony, do you recall the corporate retreat in Aspen in the winter of 2021? Yes, I was there, certainly. Do you recall giving me your laptop to hold while you went snowmobiling, because you were worried the hotel safe was too small for the equipment you had to carry?" Rossi blinked, the tick in his eye accelerating. I might have. I genuinely don't recall the specifics of that evening." "I recall it vividly, Anthony," Desiree said, her voice sharpening slightly. "You were very intoxicated that night. You told me the password was your daughter's birthday, July 14th, 2012, A7-14-2012. "Objection! Utterly irrelevant, Your Honor!" Thorne shouted, leaping up from his chair. "This is character assassination based on hearsay and drunkenness." "I'm getting there, Your Honor," Desiree said calmly, not taking her eyes off the CFO. "Anthony, is it true that Luiz Global Logistics utilizes proprietary accounting software called Shadow Ledger for all internal corporate accounting?" Rossi's face drained of color, turning a sickly gray. He looked desperately at Michael, who was now gripping the table edge, his eyes wide and pleading. That is an industry-standard tool," Rossi stammered weakly. "Is it an industry-standard tool, Anthony?" Desiree pulled a single sheet of paper from her purse, a document that looked like a technical specification sheet, and handed it to the bailiff. "Exhibit B, Your Honor, the technical description for Shadow Ledger. Because I did some late-night research, Anthony. Shadow Ledger is a specialized dual-entry bookkeeping system designed specifically to maintain two completely separate sets of books, one clean set for the IRS and external audits, and one true detailed set for the owners. It is, Anthony, by definition, a tool for corporate fraud. Is that correct?" Rossi's professional posture crumbled. His nervous tick became a noticeable twitch. I take the fifth," he stammered, crossing his arms protectively. The courtroom gasped. Taking the fifth in a civil trial regarding corporate procedure was tantamount to a full admission of guilt. "Mr. Rossi, you cannot invoke the Fifth Amendment in a civil divorce trial regarding standard corporate procedure unless you are actively admitting to a crime of moral turpitude, sir," Judge Stone thundered, her voice booming through the silent room. "Answer the petitioner's question, or I will have you removed and immediately flagged to the district attorney's office." It has that capability," Rossi whispered, defeat settling over him like a shroud. Desiree advanced. She was relentless now, no longer the trembling mouse, but the hawk diving for its prey. "On the night of December 14th, 2023, just 3 days before Mr. Luiz filed for divorce, did you oversee a wire transfer of $6 million labeled consulting fees to a company called Orion Group?" Michael told me to," Rossi blurted out, throwing his boss under the bus instantly, his panic complete. He said it was for future expansion capital. And who owns Orion Group, Anthony? I don't know, Rossi lied reflexively, avoiding eye contact. Desiree turned to the judge, calm and collected. Your Honor, I would like to submit Exhibit C. This is the official Articles of Incorporation for Orion Group, registered in Nevada. She placed the document on the overhead projector screen. The projector whirred to life, and the name of the sole shareholder on the registration document appeared clear and undeniable for everyone in Department 42 to see. Tessa Vance. The courtroom erupted in a flurry of whispers and gasps. Tessa Vance, the 24-year-old mistress, was also the owner of the $6 million shell company. Order! Order in the court! Judge Stone slammed her gavel repeatedly. She glared with pure fury at the defense table. Mr. Thorne, control your client and your witnesses, or I will start issuing sanctions that will make your professional head spin. You assured this court the assets were clean. Marcus Thorne leaned toward Michael, his face cold with venom, betrayal replacing his professional detachment. You told me the girl wasn't involved in the financials. You swore she was just a secretary, he hissed. She's not, I swear she's not, Michael whispered back, absolutely terrified, his face now a mottled mask of purple and white. I just used her name because she was a clean, non-corporate proxy. I didn't think Desiree would ever find it. She's a housewife, Marcus. She knits. Desiree returned to her table. She sat down and took a large sip of water. Her hand was shaking violently now, not from fear, but from the sudden immense crash of adrenaline. The air was thick and heavy, charged with accusation. She looked at Michael. He wasn't laughing anymore. He looked at her with a sick mixture of raw fear and absolute confusion, like a man who had walked into his own house and found a stranger sitting in his favorite chair, holding the deed. But Desiree knew this was only the beginning. Exposing the money was the easy part. The hard part, the truly brutal part, was proving why she deserved it. Because Michael had one more devastating card left to play, a card designed to destroy her character, leaving her with nothing regardless of the financial discoveries. Thorne stood up. The smirk was gone, replaced by the cold, calculating focus of a predator who had been wounded but was far from defeated. He adjusted his tie, his eyes flickering with ruthless determination. Your Honor, Thorne's voice was icy, perfectly controlled. We would like to move past the financial technicalities for a moment. We would like to address the issue of petitioner's conduct and capacity. We call Mrs. Desiree Moore to the stand for cross-examination. Desiree froze. This was the moment she had been steeling herself for, the dirty laundry Michael had been saving, the gaslighting, the forced institutionalization, and the diagnosis he had engineered. This was the real war. She took another deep breath, stood up, and walked to the witness box. Desiree took the oath, placing her hand on the worn Bible. Her mind raced. She had known this character attack was coming. Michael had spent the last 2 years setting this trap, systematically dismantling her sanity, making sure that when she finally spoke, no one would believe a word she said. The moment she sat in the witness box, the weight of that calculated abuse settled over her. Marcus Thorne wasted no time. He moved out from behind the defense table and walked directly toward her, invading her personal space, relying on intimidation. Mrs. Moore, Thorne began, his voice taking on a new, saccharine tone, heavy with faux sympathy that made Desiree's skin crawl. You seem surprisingly knowledgeable about your husband's business affairs today, surprisingly so, considering your background, wouldn't you agree? I pay attention, Mr. Thorne, Desiree stated simply, refusing to break eye contact. Do you, Mrs. Moore? Thorne sneered. Because according to a sworn affidavit filed and admitted this morning from your former psychiatrist, Dr. Ezra Finch, you suffer from acute paranoid delusions. The gallery went silent. The sound of paranoid delusions echoed in the marble room like a death knell. Thorne had successfully introduced the dirty laundry. "Is it not true, Mrs. Moore, that you were voluntarily institutionalized in the summer of 2018 for a severe mental breakdown?" Desiree's composure wavered. This was the moment of maximum vulnerability. I sought help for deep clinical depression, Mr. Thorne," she said quietly, her voice tightening with the trauma of the memory. "I had lost a child earlier that year." "Ah, yes, a tragedy," Thorne murmured, turning to the judge as if sharing a confidence, yet loud enough for every reporter to hear. "But during that time in the facility, Mrs. Moore, is it not true that you repeatedly and falsely accused your husband of spying on you, of installing listening devices, and of systematically gaslighting you to manipulate your perception of reality?" "Michael was gaslighting me," Desiree insisted, though the words sounded frantic and hollow against Thorne's polished assault. "And is it not true that you were heavily medicated for these delusional episodes? You were placed on a cocktail of powerful antipsychotics and mood stabilizers, were you not?" "Yes, I was," she conceded, hating the way her own answer sounded like an admission of guilt. Thorne leaned in closer, his silver hair glinting under the courtroom lights. He was going for the kill shot, quoting the legal term Michael had coached him on for months. "Then, Mrs. Moore, isn't it true, in medical and legal terms, that you possess a documented history of fabricating stories to garner attention and are therefore an unreliable narrator? And that any evidence you present must be viewed through the lens of a potentially delusional mind?" Michael Luiz, sitting smugly at the defense table, finally started grinning again. This was his narrative. Crazy Desiree. Sad, broken, crazy Desiree. The strategy was working perfectly. Desiree looked at the judge, then at Michael. The wave of humiliation threatened to drown her. For years, she had fought the despair, the confusion, the isolation Michael had engineered. But she had prepared for this moment. She had learned the law that applied to her trauma. "I was medicated, Mr. Thorne," Desiree said, her voice now dangerously calm, "because my husband was gaslighting me. And unlike your affidavit, I can prove that too." Thorne stopped grinning. "How, Mrs. Moore? With more phantom documents stolen from encrypted files? With more delusional testimony?" he mocked, a careless laugh escaping his lips. "No, Mr. Thorne," Desiree said, the words cutting through the air like thin glass. "With the recordings." Thorne's smile vanished completely. The courtroom held its collective breath. Michael went from a triumphant grin to a look of utter immediate horror. "What recordings?" Thorne demanded, his voice suddenly sharp with genuine alarm. Desiree looked directly at the judge. "The state of New York is a one-party consent state for audio recording, Your Honor." She cited the law, perfectly, confidently. "For the last 2 years of our marriage, I have carried a digital recorder in my pocket. Every threat, every admission, every time Michael told me he would destroy me if I ever tried to leave, I have captured it. It is all there." She reached into her worn velvet purse and pulled out a small, nondescript black USB drive. "Exhibit D, Your Honor," she said. Michael Luiz surged to his feet, knocking his Italian leather chair over with a deafening thud. "She can't do that. That's private, Marcus. Stop her. Stop her now." "Mr. Luiz, sit down," Judge Stone roared, slamming the gavel with such force that the sound vibrated in the mahogany walls. "Mr. Thorne, if your client speaks one more time out of turn, I will have the bailiff physically restrain him." The judge turned to Desiree, her face a mask of stern caution. "Mrs. Moore, you are telling this court you have audio evidence of the respondent admitting to—" "What exactly?" Desiree looked straight at Michael, who stood frozen, his eyes wide and panicked, the picture of a man realizing his life was about to end. "Admitting to the corporate fraud, Your Honor," Desiree declared, her voice now stronger than it had ever been. "And admitting that he paid Dr. Ezra Finch to falsify my psychiatric diagnosis to keep me under control, quiet, and legally discredited." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Even the court reporter ceased typing, letting the profound accusation hang in the stagnant air. "Sergeant Davies," Judge Stone commanded the bailiff, "take the petitioner's device, plug it into the court's AV system, now." The bailiff took the USB drive from Desiree's trembling hand. He plugged it in, and a projection screen descended from the ceiling, displaying a simple media player interface. Judge Stone leaned back in her high chair, her face unreadable, but her eyes intensely focused. "Mr. Thorne," the judge stated, her voice icy, "I am allowing this under the crime-fraud exception to marital privilege. If this recording contains evidence of a crime, your objection is overruled before you even make it. Proceed, Sergeant." Marcus Thorne didn't object. He was too busy staring at his client. Michael was gripping the edge of the defense table so hard his knuckles were snow-white. He looked like a man watching a bomb countdown he couldn't stop, realizing the woman he called a fool was a meticulous investigator. "Play it," the judge ordered. The courtroom speakers crackled with static, and then a voice, unmistakably Michael Luiz's, filled the room. The audio was clear, recorded in a space with a hard echo, likely their high-ceiling master bathroom. "Stop crying, Desiree. It's pathetic. You really think anyone is going to believe you? You're a high school dropout who got lucky. I know what you're doing with the Cayman accounts, Michael. I saw the papers in your briefcase, the ones for Blue Ocean." "You saw papers. You don't even know what you're looking at. But let's say you tell someone. Who are they going to believe? The CEO of a $200 million company or the hysterical housewife who spent a month in a psych ward? You put me there. You told Dr. Finch to say I was paranoid. I didn't tell him anything. I bought him. $50,000 is a lot of money for a shrink with gambling debts. He'll write whatever diagnosis I want. Paranoia, schizophrenia, bipolar. Take your pick. If you try to touch my money, Desiree, I won't just divorce you. I will have you committed permanently. I will make sure you drool into a cup for the rest of your life while I enjoy my money with someone who appreciates it. Now get out of my sight." The silence that followed the end of the recording was deafening, heavier than the recording itself. Judge Stone slowly took off her glasses. She meticulously cleaned them with a small cloth, her movements deliberate and terrifyingly calm. She put them back on and looked down at the defense table, her face now completely expressionless. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the room like razor wire. "Did your client just admit to bribing a medical professional to falsify a mental health diagnosis for the express purpose of discrediting a witness in a potential legal dispute?" Marcus Thorne stood up, visibly pale, his hands shaking slightly. "Your Honor, I have not heard this recording before. I cannot verify its authenticity. It could be deep fake technology or AI generated, which is becoming alarmingly common, I assure you." "It's not AI, Your Honor," Desiree interjected, standing up at her table, her voice now strong, unwavering, and laced with absolute triumph. "Because I didn't come alone, Your Honor. I have a witness who can verify the recording's contents." "Who?" Michael snapped, his voice cracking, desperation overriding his sense of self-preservation. "Who do you have, Desiree? I isolated you from everyone." Desiree looked toward the back of the courtroom. The heavy oak doors slowly creaked open. A man shuffled in. He was disheveled, wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit, his eyes darting around the room nervously. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week and was terrified to be there. It was Dr. Ezra Finch. Michael Luiz gasped, the sound choking in his throat. "No!" "I call Dr. Ezra Finch to the stand," Desiree announced. The full weight of the truth, the abuse, the fraud, the bribery, had just been confirmed, and Michael Luiz was suddenly the one who looked utterly insane. Marcus Thorne stared at Michael Luiz, the silent question hanging between them. "You said he was in Europe. You said he was unreachable." "He was," Michael hissed, eyes wide with panic. "I paid for his plane ticket, Marcus. I told him to go dark." Dr. Ezra Finch walked with a discernible limp to the witness stand. He refused to look at Michael, focusing instead on the floor, his hands visibly shaking as he took the oath. He was a professional man, stripped of his dignity, reduced to a trembling criminal. "Dr. Finch," Desiree began, approaching the stand with a measured, gentle pace. She did not want to intimidate him, only to allow him space to confess. "You treated me in 2018, correct?" "Yes," Finch mumbled, his voice tight. "And you signed an affidavit submitted by Mr. Thorne this morning, stating that I suffer from severe paranoid delusions, correct?" "Yes," he whispered again. "Dr. Finch, look at the judge. Is that affidavit true?" Finch looked up at Judge Stone. He looked at Sergeant Davies, who was standing near the door with a hand resting near his sidearm. He swallowed hard, the sound amplified by the microphone. No, Finch whispered, fresh tears welling in his eyes. "Speak up, Doctor," Judge Stone commanded, her voice firm. "No!" Finch shouted, the word ringing with raw, broken finality. "It's not true. She's sane. She's always been sane. I fabricated the diagnosis." The gallery erupted into chaos. Reporters furiously typed on their phones. The whispers turned into loud, shocked murmurs. "Why did you lie, Doctor?" Desiree asked gently, her voice almost comforting. Finch pointed a shaking, accusing finger directly at Michael Luiz. "Because he told me to. He paid off my bookie. I owed $40,000 to some very dangerous people. Michael paid it. He told me to gaslight her, to tell her she was crazy. He told me to prescribe heavy sedatives to make her look confused and erratic in public. I needed the money." "I'm sorry, Desiree. I'm so incredibly sorry." "Objection, Your Honor. This witness is clearly under duress. He is unreliable and appears to be suffering a psychotic break." Thorne roared, desperate to stop the torrential bleeding. "The only duress I see, Mr. Thorne," Judge Stone said, her eyes narrowed with lethal coldness, "is the perjury your client just suborned and coerced. Sit down, Mr. Thorne. Sit down before I have you joined as a co-defendant on an obstruction charge." Thorne sat down hard. He immediately slid his chair a deliberate 6 inches away from Michael Luiz, signifying the end of their professional relationship. Desiree looked at her husband. Michael was no longer the arrogant tycoon. He was sweating profusely, his perfectly gelled hair starting to droop, his jaw slack. He looked small, defeated, and profoundly foolish. "I have no further questions for this witness, Your Honor," Desiree concluded. "Dr. Finch," the judge said ominously, "you are not to leave this building. Sergeant Davies will escort you to a holding room. The district attorney's office will be very interested in your testimony regarding bribery, prescription fraud, and professional misconduct." As Finch was led away, sobbing uncontrollably, the courtroom felt like a pressure cooker about to explode. The air was thick with the smell of scorched pride and impending doom. Desiree returned to her table. She had won the battle of character. She had proven she wasn't crazy. But the war wasn't over. She still had to secure the money, all of it. And, more importantly, prove why Michael's actions warranted the total forfeiture of the estate. "Mrs. Moore," the judge said, her tone now shifted to one of professional respect, "do you have further evidence regarding the nature of the marital assets?" "I do, Your Honor," Desiree confirmed. "But for this next part, I'm going to need a simple office calculator, and I'm going to need the court to direct its attention to the pension fund for the employees of Luiz Global Logistics." Michael Luiz's head snapped up. The fear in his eyes was no longer about a divorce settlement. It was the absolute raw fear of a lengthy prison sentence. "The pension fund?" Marcus Thorne whispered, his face going pale again. He turned to his client, his voice dangerously low. "What did you do, Michael? Tell me the truth right now. If you lie to me again, I walk, sanctions or no sanctions." "It's complicated, Marcus," Michael stammered. I borrowed against it, just temporarily. To cover the margin calls on the overseas expansion, I was going to pay it back before year-end." Thorne closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose, inhaling deeply, processing the catastrophic realization. You embezzled from your employees' retirement savings to fund a shell company, Michael. That's not a divorce issue, that's federal wire fraud. Mrs. Moore, proceed, the judge ordered, her voice like ice. Desiree walked to the projector once more. She placed a new document on the glass, a complex, dense spreadsheet filled with rows of numbers and dates far beyond the scope of a casual glance. Exhibit E, Desiree announced. This is a comparison of the employee contributions to the Luiz Global 401k plan versus the actual deposits made into the custodial account at Chase Bank. She picked up a cheap red laser pointer, the kind likely bought at an office supply store, and circled a column of numbers. From January 2022 to the present, Your Honor, every single employee had 5% of their paycheck deducted for retirement. That money was supposed to go to Chase Bank, but it didn't. She slapped another paper down, this one bearing a foreign corporate logo. This, Your Honor, is the general ledger from Blue Ocean Holdings in the Cayman Islands. The dates and amounts match perfectly. January 15th, $400,000 deducted from payroll. January 16th, $398,000 deposited into Blue Ocean. He was systematically skimming the retirement fund, laundering the proceeds through the Caymans to avoid taxes, and then using the remaining capital to purchase commercial real estate under his mistress's name. The courtroom erupted into a sustained buzz. This was no longer just a divorce. It was a corporate scandal of massive criminal proportions, touching the lives of thousands of working families. Mr. Thorne, Judge Stone said, her voice deadly calm, a profound silence following the utterance of his name. Does your client have a legal explanation for why the employee pension fund is empty? Thorne stood up slowly, looking utterly defeated. He looked like a man who realized his entire storied career might well end today, right alongside his client's freedom. Your Honor, Thorne managed, his voice hoarse. We must request an immediate recess. I need to confer with my client regarding potential Fifth Amendment liability. Denied, Judge Stone said instantly, her decision absolute. We are in the middle of a trial. If your client wishes to invoke his Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination regarding the embezzlement, he may do so. But that will allow this court to draw an adverse inference regarding the equitable division of marital assets. The judge leaned over the bench, her expression stern and unforgiving. In layman's terms, Mr. Thorne, if he stays silent to stay out of jail, he loses the divorce. If he speaks to win the divorce, he goes to jail. Choose. It was the ultimate checkmate. Michael Luiz stood up, shoving Thorne violently aside. He was unhinged, the mask of the cool, collected billionaire completely shattered. This is ridiculous, Michael shouted, sweat pouring down his face. I am the CEO. It is my company. I can move capital wherever I want. It was a temporary bridge loan. I was going to pay it back. A bridge loan unauthorized by the board, Michael? Desiree asked calmly from her table, her eyes filled with cold pity. Because I have the board meeting minutes here, Michael. You never told them. In fact, you fired the internal auditor who asked about the discrepancy last month, didn't you? Mr. Timothy Clark. Clark was incompetent, Michael yelled, his face turning crimson. Just like you. You think you're so smart, Desiree. You think you can take me down. I built this empire. I am Luiz Global Logistics. Without me, you are nothing. You're just a waitress. Mr. Luiz, control yourself. The judge slammed the gavel, warning him one last time. No, Michael screamed. She hacked my computer. That's illegal. This evidence is inadmissible. Arrest her. I didn't hack your computer, Michael, Desiree said softly. The room went quiet, desperate to hear the final defining twist. I didn't have to, she continued. You linked your work iPad to the family cloud account so you could quickly upload photos of your trips with Tessa. You were so arrogant, so convinced of your own security, that you didn't realize that every single document you saved, every encrypted spreadsheet, every ledger you edited was automatically backing up to the family server in the basement. The server I paid to install 6 years ago, Michael, to store our wedding photos. She looked at him with the finality of a judge delivering a sentence. You took everything from me, Michael. My dignity, my friends. You tried to take my sanity, but you forgot to change your iCloud settings. A nervous, shocked ripple of laughter swept through the gallery. The sheer hubris of the CEO was his final, fatal undoing. Marcus Thorne began packing his briefcase with frantic, desperate speed. "Where are you going, Mr. Thorne?" Judge Stone asked. "I am withdrawing as counsel, Your Honor," Thorne declared, not meeting Michael's eyes. "My client has demonstrably lied to me, implicated me in the suborning of perjury, and is currently confessing to federal wire fraud on the open court record. I am ethically and professionally bound to withdraw." "You traitor!" Michael grabbed his lawyer's arm. "I pay you $1,000 an hour. You don't leave until I say so." "Get your hands off me," Thorne snarled, shaking him off. The partnership dissolved into mutual hatred. "Mr. Thorne, you will remain in the courtroom until this hearing is concluded," the judge ruled firmly. "But you are not required to participate in further defense. Now, Mrs. Moore, you have proven the assets exist. You have proven spousal abuse and massive corporate fraud. What is your final request for judgment?" Desiree took a deep, steadying breath. She looked at her yellow legal pad, the one she had been clutching like a shield. She didn't need it anymore. "I don't want half, Your Honor," she said. Michael froze, his face registering a fresh wave of confusion and relief. "What?" he croaked. "I don't want half," Desiree repeated, louder and clearer. "I want it all." "On what grounds?" the judge asked, intrigued, sensing the legal brilliance of the final move. "On the grounds of malicious dissipation of assets, Your Honor," Desiree cited the legal precedent perfectly. "When one spouse maliciously wastes or hides assets specifically to defraud the other, the court has the discretion to award 100% of the remaining marital estate to the victim. Michael has emptied the employee pension fund, he has spent millions on his mistress, and he has hidden the rest in the Caymans." She held up a printout of a flight itinerary. "If you award him half, he will flee the country. He has a flight booked to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil for tonight at 10 p.m. Exhibit F." Michael frantically checked his pockets for his phone. He had booked that flight barely 2 hours ago during a bathroom break. How did she have it? "He is a severe flight risk, Your Honor," Desiree concluded. "I am asking for full control of the remaining liquid assets, the marital home, and, crucially, the voting shares of Luiz Global Logistics to be held in trust so that I can repay the thousands of employees he stole from." It was a noble move, a true act of character. She wasn't asking for the money for yachts. She was asking for it to save the workers. Judge Stone looked at Michael Luiz, then at the mountain of irrefutable criminal evidence. "I'm inclined to agree," the judge said, her voice heavy with finality. "Mr. Luiz, surrender your passport to Sergeant Davies immediately." I left it at home," Michael lied desperately. "Sergeant Davies, search him," the judge ordered. The bailiff stepped forward. Michael backed away, screaming, "Don't touch me!" He was a trapped animal, glancing wildly at the exit doors. Suddenly, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open with a loud, resounding bang. Everyone turned. 6 men and women in navy blue windbreakers with yellow lettering marched in, followed by 2 uniformed NYPD officers. The lettering on the jackets read SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, and behind them, DOJ, Department of Justice. The lead agent, a tall woman with a stern, focused face, pointed directly at the defense table. "Michael Luiz," she announced, her voice ringing with authority. "I am Special Agent Reyes. We have a sealed warrant for your arrest on charges including securities fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering." Michael slumped into his chair, a final guttural sound escaping his lips. He looked at Desiree. She didn't look away. She didn't gloat. She just watched. "I told you, Michael," she whispered silently across the room, the phrase echoing the years of gaslighting. "I told you I wasn't crazy." The drama, however, wasn't quite finished. As Agent Reyes and her team moved to cuff Michael, a final malicious act of professional betrayal unfolded. Marcus Thorne, standing rigid with his briefcase clasped tightly, spoke up. "Officer," he said, pointing a steady finger at Michael, "my client has just confessed to additional federal crimes on the open court record, specifically a scheme to defraud the IRS and the systematic embezzlement of employee retirement funds. I suggest you obtain the full transcript immediately." "You traitor!" Michael lunged at Thorne, his face contorted with rage, only to be intercepted and restrained by two SEC agents. The sight of the billionaire CEO, handcuffed and screaming obscenities at his own lawyer and his wife, was a spectacle that ensured this case would dominate the news cycle for weeks. The chaos of Michael's arrest took 20 minutes to clear. When the doors finally closed, leaving the courtroom in a stunned, dusty silence, only a few people remained. Desiree, Judge Stone, the court reporter, and Marcus Thorne, who was frantically shuffling papers and attempting to appear busy, looking like a rat sensing the ship had already cracked in half. "Mr. Thorne," Judge Stone said, her voice echoing in the empty, vast room. Thorne froze instantly. "You are perilously close to being disbarred. If you have any desire to save your professional license, you will cooperate fully and completely with the court-appointed receiver and the federal authorities. Do I make myself absolutely clear?" "Crystal, Your Honor," Thorne replied, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. He glanced quickly at Desiree, a look of cold, professional calculation, not defeat, before hurrying out the side exit reserved for counsel. Desiree stood alone at the plaintiff's table. She felt oddly drained, the massive adrenaline rush giving way to a bone-deep exhaustion. "Mrs. Moore," the judge said gently, addressing her with newfound respect. "Yes, Your Honor. In light of the federal indictment and the freezing of Mr. Luiz's personal assets, the company, Luiz Global Logistics, is effectively headless. The stock is guaranteed to freefall the moment the market opens tomorrow morning. Thousands of jobs are immediately at risk due to the instability." "I know, Your Honor," Desiree said. "That is precisely why I requested control." Judge Stone nodded slowly, considering the gravity of the situation. "I am hereby granting you an emergency conservatorship over the voting shares held by the marital estate. Until the divorce is finalized or the criminal trial concludes, you are, for all intents and purposes, the majority shareholder. You are the interim owner of Luiz Global Logistics." The judge leaned forward, her expression grave. "Be careful, Desiree Moore. You just took down one wolf, but you are about to walk into a den of vipers. The board of directors will not welcome you with open arms. They will try to eat you alive." Desiree picked up her yellow legal pad, now filled with notes she no longer needed. She no longer looked like the trembling waitress who had walked in 3 hours ago. She looked like the new head of a multi-million-dollar corporation. "Let them try," she said. 2 hours later, a black town car pulled up to the gleaming glass skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan. The polished steel logo of Luiz Global Logistics was etched above the revolving doors. Desiree stepped out. She hadn't changed clothes. She was still wearing the 5-year-old sapphire dress Michael had mocked. As she walked through the lobby, the atmosphere was electric with fear. Employees huddled in corners, whispering frantically. They had seen the breaking news. They knew the FBI had raided the headquarters earlier that morning. When she reached the executive floor, the 42nd floor, the receptionist area was deserted. The receptionist had fled. Desiree walked straight to the heavy double doors of the boardroom. She could hear shouting from inside, panicked, desperate and loud. She pushed the doors open. Around the massive oval table sat 12 men and 1 woman, the full board of directors. They were arguing loudly, phones pressed to their ears, ties loosened, their professional masks shattered. The room went instantly silent as Desiree entered. "Who let you in?" barked Conrad Vance, the chairman of the board. Vance was a 70-year-old corporate raider with a reputation for stripping companies for parts. "Security, get this woman out of here immediately." "Sit down, Conrad," Desiree commanded. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the air like a razor. Vance scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "Excuse me? Do you know who I am? This is a restricted executive meeting. Go home and bake cookies, Desiree. Your husband is in jail, and this company is under our control now, under my authority." Desiree walked to the head of the table, stopping directly behind Michael's empty chair. She didn't sit. She stood, placing her hands firmly on the leather backrest. "Actually," she said, pulling the court order from her velvet purse and sliding it down the polished surface of the table, "it's under mine." Vance snatched the paper. He read the judge's signature, his face turning the color of ash. This is insane," Vance sputtered. "Henderson, Stone, gave you the voting rights. You have no experience. You're a housewife." "I am the court-appointed conservator of the Luiz estate," Desiree corrected him, her voice patient but lethal, "which, as you well know, owns 51% of the voting stock. That makes me the chairwoman, and as my first act, I am calling this meeting to order." "We won't stand for this," shouted another board member, a heavy-set man named Baxter. "We are filing an emergency motion to remove you. The stock is down 40% in 2 hours. We need to sell the entire logistics division to Amazon by end of day to save capital." "No," Desiree said. "What do you mean, no?" Baxter stood up, outraged. "You don't understand business. We have a liquidity crisis." "We have a corruption crisis, Baxter," Desiree shot back. "And we are absolutely not selling the logistics division. That division employs 4,000 people in Ohio and Michigan. If you sell it, they lose their 401k matches and their pensions because of the way Michael Luiz structured the debt. I read the contracts, Baxter." The room fell silent again. They were looking at her differently now, not with respect, but with profound, terrifying caution. "So what is your brilliant plan, Desiree?" Vance sneered. "Hug the employees until the stock recovers?" "No," Desiree said. "My plan is to cut the cancer out." She reached into her bag and pulled out a stack of manila folders. She tossed one in front of Vance, one in front of Baxter, and one in front of the female board member, Linda Gray. "What is this?" Linda asked, opening the folder, her hands shaking. "That, Linda," Desiree said, her voice dropping to a theatrical hush, "is a record of the kickbacks you 3 received from the construction of the new warehouse in Nevada. You approved a bid that was 20% higher than the market rate, and coincidentally, the construction company is owned by your brother-in-law, Linda." Linda went white. Desiree turned to Vance. "And you, Conrad, you've been short-selling Luiz Global stock for 3 months. You knew Michael was cooking the books. You were betting against the company you were paid to protect. You violated every fiduciary duty in the book." Vance slammed the folder shut. "This is slander." "It's in the emails, Conrad," Desiree replied. "Michael kept everything. He didn't trust you any more than you trusted him. He kept the receipts." She leaned forward, gripping the chair. "Here is how this is going to work. Vance, Baxter, Gray, you are resigning. Effective immediately. You will cite personal health reasons. If you do, I won't hand these folders to the SEC agents who are currently downstairs seizing the servers. If you fight me, you'll share a cell with Michael." Vance looked at the remaining board members. They looked away, terrified. He was alone. "You're a witch," Vance hissed. "I'm a wife who paid attention," Desiree replied. "Get out." Vance stood up, grabbed his coat, and stormed out. Baxter and Gray followed, heads bowed in total defeat. Desiree looked at the remaining 9 board members. They sat perfectly still, petrified. "Now," Desiree said, finally sitting in the leather chair. It was slightly too big for her, but she filled the room with her unexpected presence.
Let's talk about how we're going to pay back the pension fund, starting with a review of the company's real estate holdings, specifically the ones Michael purchased using Tessa Vance's shell company.
6 months later, the fall of the Luiz global logistics empire was absolute. Michael Luiz took a plea deal for 25 years for his federal crimes, crying hysterically as he was led away in handcuffs. Marcus Thorne, stripped of his immunity due to the audio evidence and the red notebook, was charged with first-degree murder. He died in prison 3 months into his life sentence. But the story ended where it began, with the land and the people. On a crisp autumn morning, Desiree stood at the head of the Luiz Global boardroom table. The corporate raiders were gone. In their seats sat truck drivers, shift managers and secretaries. "This company was built on the land my father died for," Desiree told them, her voice calm and strong. "Effective today, Luiz Global Logistics is an employee-owned cooperative. You own the shares. You keep the profits." The room erupted in emotional cheers. Desiree walked out of the building and drove to a quiet cemetery in New Jersey. She knelt before a simple gravestone, Giovanni Russo. "I got it back, Papa," she whispered, placing the court order on the grass. "I got the land back, and I made them pay." She stood up, wiping her eyes. She wasn't the waitress. She wasn't the victim. She was Desiree Russo, and she had never been stronger. They say that hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. But Desiree proved that fury isn't always loud. Sometimes it's organized. Michael and Marcus thought they were untouchable because they had money and power. They laughed at Desiree because she was just a housewife. But they forgot the most important rule. You never, ever corner a survivor. If you were on the edge of your seat watching Desiree move from victim to victor, dismantling a criminal empire with just a yellow notepad and a recorder, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. Tell me in the comments below, do you think 25 years was enough for Michael Luiz after everything he did? Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another story where the underestimated exacts the ultimate revenge.